the coding part, or just taking notes?
Just, I won't be able to stop and help debug, so if you are following along, just keep that in mind. But we will be going over a lot more than we did yesterday, so it might be best just to watch and then practice it after. Okay, I have an empty directory here. Callan, what is my first step if I want to build a server?
You want to make server.js.
First step.
Oh, install npm init
Aha.
-y.
What does that give me?
That gives you a package JSON.
Okay, what is a package JSON?
A package JSON is like a list for your application to refer to of your dependencies.
Yeah, among other things, but yeah.
Is there a better way to describe that?
It's like it's a node project. If you're making any project in Node, it's like the manifest for it. So not only does it hold the dependencies, what we're using, but it also holds scripts. This is where like start would be, so we can say npm start, and our package JSON runs the start command that we write here. If I wrote npm start right now, it's going to just say that. Oh, so let me try this. So I write a start script in here and say echo hello world. This is bash syntax for writing commands. Echo is like console log. So I'm saying when I say npm start, console log hello world, and then exit the process. What's that? Oh, thank you. And actually, that's an invalid JSON if I put that there. Okay, so now if I say npm start, it will say hello world, and then exit. So these are commands that tie into npm directly. That's another thing package.json does for us. And there's only a couple times where we'll do this. We saw early in the course, we replaced this with jest. So npm test would run jest, just among other commands we can do. It also keeps track of what is our main file. It will default to index.js. So the second step, Talon said it, we need to make a server.js. And this right here needs to be the name of our main file. So you can call your server file server.js, that's what I do, but another common name for it is index.js. If you choose server, make sure your package.json says server here. So it knows what our main file is for this application for our server. All right, next command, Brandon, what do I need? I'm going to build a server, but I don't have that ability yet.
Express?
Yeah. What's the command?
npm install express.
npm install express. Okay, so we are now ready to build a server. Woot. Let's go to server. Oh, I didn't even bring that up. But yes, create React app creates a get ignore for you. But right now, are my node modules getting ignored? No, so I will touch and create a dot get ignore and add to it node underscore modules /. Now, if I was in a repository, we would have seen this get dimmed out. VS Code showing us that it is being ignored now.
What did you just do there?
Created a get ignore and put the word node modules in.
Is there a reason why someone might get ignored that / in front of them?
You know, and even this will work in most cases. Typically, it's like this. And that will ignore any node modules in this directory or lower.
So why is it that we have that slash on the right here, but other places we've had it on the left?
That's what we were just talking about. I'm not exactly sure. This will ignore everything in this directory and below.
You put both of those in there?
It does matter. And so when you have once you have a Git repository, if you write this in, it doesn't dim out, try it on the other end or just leave it alone. You just want to make sure it's ignored. And I create one of these per project because that's what we're going to have to do. We only had one for the assignments folder because it ignored everything. But when you're making a project, every project will be its own repository going forward. Group project, personal project, it won't be in your assignments. So it will need all of its own configuration for each folder. Okay, let's keep going with server. Kevin, Line 1 of my server JS, what am I doing? Require express. So we'll get express imported. That's just like saying import express from express. All right, express is our package, but we need to create a server from it. So Brian, line 2, how do I create a server using this package?
Const, you have. Oh, there you go. Equal to brackets. Express. Yeah.
Express.
Yeah.
Parentheses.
Parentheses.
Yeah, so express is a function that returns an object that has all the properties needed to make a server. So we call this package to create a new server. All right, and then we need one more thing to make our server actually run. Caitlin?
App.listen.
Yeah, we tell our server to listen. So what's the first argument? Cool, and the second argument? That just lets us know. Yeah, I'm gonna put on a new line. Console.log, server is running on port 7000. How would I access this through my personal browser? If the server was running, how would I visit this? Localhost 7000, okay. I want to start my server up and see that it's running. Dan, what is the command? So we could say node server, but that won't refresh. So what's the other command? We install a package globally. No daemon. We've already installed it, so we don't need to install it again. We can just use it, run our server. There we go. It's running on port 7000. If I visit my localhost 7000 right now and send a GET request, what will it send me back?
Server is running on.
Cannot get. It's proving that our server is running, but it doesn't know how to receive a GET request. We did it globally yesterday. So it's kind of like Create React app. We install it globally once. We don't have to do it again. We can just use it. Okay. So we need to teach it how to get, and that's what we're going to start off with. GET request. A get all request. But in order to do this, we need data. So typically in our server setup, we'd still have quite a ways to go. We need to connect to the database. We need to make sure all of our data is defined and how it's going to be used. We're not doing that yet. We're using a fake database. So for now, I'm going to put an entry up here called fake DB. And today, our fake database will be movies. Yay. Everyone likes movies, I think. Maybe?
Jim.
Movies that have been released, maybe. I don't know. Joker, sure. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's good. Okay, and we'll get another movie in here. Title, The Godfather. Let's do one more.
Lilo and Stitch.
Lilo and Stitch. One of my favorites. So good. Good old Disney movies. Okay, well, this is, if this is truly a database, what are all these objects missing? IDs, keys. They need a way to be specified individually. So until we get a real database, we still have to make our own IDs. And so we're going to install a package to do that for us. We're going to npm install UUID. It's a package that just generates random strings as IDs. They won't be duplicated. So we can use this for just like 2 or 3 days until we actually have a database. So
what is it?
UUID. So I'll npm install UUID, then up above, I will say const UUID equals require UUID /v4. It has a couple different versions. Version 4 is my favorite. And now this is a function that if we call it, it'll just produce an ID. So for all of these objects, I'm going to say each of them have an underscore ID equal to UUID. And that will generate a new ID every time this server gets booted up. And we're just going to deal with new IDs. Not a big deal until we get actual databases. Okay, so now we have data that will actually look like what we get from MongoDB.
That's so much easier than having to figure it out and yourself.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so now we have data we can actually get. So let's teach our server how to do a GET request. Let's start the server back up. And Diana, how do I do a, so let's set up a route for a GET request to just our / that. Okay, we tell our server how to get. Okay, so we set up the endpoint. We're just going to do, let's actually make the endpoint / movies. Right, we're following REST. That makes sense. Okay, and now it's the second. Rec and res for request and response. Then the fat arrow. Okay, so when it gets a request to movies, it will call this function and give us the request object from the user and the response object from Express so we can send a response. All right, inside of this route, Talon, how am I going to send back all the movies?
So you'd say return movies. Is it not that simple?
Not return. There's a method we have to call. Res.send. Response, send the following, send the movies. Now this is almost equivalent to a return statement. It won't actually end the function. So if I had a console log right here, it would end the server process, but the server would still run this because this is a function and we didn't tell it to exit. We said send the movies and then it would console log. So if we actually want the server process to end the function as well, we'll send the movies and we'll say return res.send. It's not really required because this function isn't doing more than just sending it, so I don't need it. This will end the same. But just know this is just a function call, so it doesn't actually, it ends the server process, but this function will keep firing whatever's left before actually finishing. Okay, let's test it out. If I wanted to do it in the browser, how do I hit up and get back my array of movies? It still cannot get. Why can't it get to /?
Oh, because you got a / movies.
Yeah, my endpoint is / movies. There we go. So there, and you can see UID created unique IDs. That's the last time we're going to do it in the browser though, because this is where we should be doing it. So we're going to do a GET request in here to / movies, get, there we go.
Now, every time you call, does it update the IDs? Or
Yep,
do they...
UUID is getting called again. So notice all these IDs will change. Oh, sorry, no, GET request right now, we're still in the same server instance. The server is a program that was started with Notamon and it hasn't been updated. But if I do something that causes the server to restart, like write something, now when I do a GET request, all the IDs will have changed because the server restarted and called all those functions again.
Okay.
So again, we only have to deal with that for like 2 or 3 days and it's not that big of a deal. But just know that this will not stay. We will be moving this to MongoDB very soon. And then all of what we're doing inside of the routes will also change. We're going to be doing it with plain JavaScript right now to kind of work out the logic. But when we install Mongoose, Mongoose has methods that goes and gets the data for you, lets you send it back. It does all this work for you. We're just going to work it out ourselves first, and then let Mongoose do the heavy lifting. Okay, so that's a get all. Let's do an app.get to 1.
So / movies
Okay.
/ ID.
So when we're talking React router, when you were setting up a route parameter, what was the symbol we had to use to denote that this was a parameter? Colon. So colon says this part of the endpoint is a function. And Sam will be going over this more in depth today, but yeah, we're gonna pass in something. And this is just a parameter. So I can call this anything I want. I'm gonna call it _ID though, because that's what I'm gonna be sending. I'm sending in one of these IDs to say I want to get the movie by this ID. And we get the rec and res objects. All right, I have an array of movies and I'm somehow receiving the ID. How do we receive the ID? Well, we're gonna console.log the REQ object. What is the REQ object again? What is it actually? Request. Where is all this data coming from? What's that?
Postman.
Yes, well, the request object is coming from whoever's requesting. So if they send you an object to have posted, or they're sending you a parameter, the data they sent you here is going to be in this object, because that's everything from the user. So if I console log rec, and then open my server console here so we can see it, I'm going to make a GET request to /movies, /movies, I am a parameter, and send. Now our route hasn't been taught what to do, so it's just kind of pending here, so I'm going to stop it. But now we can go look at this console log, what actually happened. So here is the REQ object. Large, right? Well, there's two properties of this object we're worried about. Okay, so URL, that's cool. It knows what the URL is. We saw that is I am a parameter. It sees the headers that were sent. But the two properties we are looking for, might have passed them on the other side. Let's see.
It just keeps going.
Yeah, it's a pretty big object. Okay, so we missed it. It's down here.
Is there like a way to search through here?
Well, if you know what you're looking for, I could have just console logged that, but okay, here we are.
No, I mean like the way that you do like command F, you can look for things.
Oh.
Is there a way to do that with the terminal?
I'm sure there is. I don't know, but yeah, I'm sure there is. I know there's something nice about just scrolling through the endless possibilities. Okay, so where do we see my ID? Where do we see this? It's right here in the console log somewhere. Params. So rec.params is an object with key value pairs. The key is whatever I named the parameter. The value is whatever I passed in. Just like on the front end, it was props.match.params. On the back end, it's rec.params. Receives whatever data was passed through the parameter by the name. So it's the reason it's called _ID in this params object. Reason it's called that there is because that's what we called it here. If I called this something, this param object would have a something key equal to whatever I passed in. Okay, so rec.params, if I console log that, params, and send this GET request again, send, cancel. Now, the console log we get is this object with the ID. If I change this to anything and send this request, the rec.param object has a .anything equal to what I send. So we'll review this, but that's how we're going to be sending IDs to the back end from the front end. So we have a rec.params._ID that matches the ID of one of these objects. Caitlin, what higher order array method allows me to loop through an array and return an object that matches what I'm looking for? I want to find the one object in here and get access to it that matches rec.params._ID.
Maybe filter?
So filter, what will filter return? What will filter always return?
One thing.
Not always. Filter always returns an array. Even if it filters out everything, it will return an empty array. A find one, a get one, by definition means we should only get a single item back, a single resource, a single object. So what higher order array method returns an object instead of an array? .find. So we need to find the movie that's ID matches the parameter ID. So const found movie is movies.find. And for each movie in that array, only return the movie if you see the movie's ID is equal to the parameter ID that was passed in.
And this is what Axios does all behind the.
Axios doesn't do this. Axios sends this data, but a server somewhere is picking it up and working out the logic like this.
So if you're, okay, since we're designing.
Axios is the courier. It's saying, client, the server, here's the data from the client, do what you need.
So someone like you, back a database person, running all this stuff, a server person. running all this.
For every server that you've written. And that's why it's very specific, right? If you make a GET request to something that doesn't exist in the server, nothing happens. They've defined every endpoint and what they do. They're all like little event listeners. They're all separate from themselves. When I make a GET request to movies, this code isn't even touched. It doesn't need to. Only this is, just like an event listener. All right, so now that I found the movie, how do I get that back to the user? Okay, res.send back the found movie. Let's try it. Let's first get all of our movies and test this endpoint. So get, all right, and I would like to get the Joker, so I'm going to take that ID. I'm going to put it as a parameter. If this works, what should I be getting back? What data type?
Just the title. String.
What does find return? An object. We get the whole object, just what we wanted. Cool, so now you see this is a get all, here's a get one. Now, how will this change with Mongo and Mongoose? This right here, and we won't have the database sitting on our server. So instead of just sending the movies, what we're gonna have to do is say, Mongoose, we'll say movies.find, which is a Mongoose method, and it will return our data from the database, and we'll res.send that data.
How do you connect it?
That'll be on our server file, we'll do that. But it's not gonna change too much, right? We're having to do like a find here to find one. We'll have to do a find on every request. It's a GET request with Mongoose, because Mongoose has to go find it in the database. It'll bring it back as data, and we can send that data. So it's not gonna change too much. It's gonna streamline it a bit, because again, the database won't be on our server. It's gonna be somewhere else remote, on the cloud, on a remote server. So we have to tell Mongoose to go get it, bring it back, and then we can res.send it. All right, so get and get one, get all and get one is working. Any questions on those two? Do we know how this is working? Sam will review all this afternoon. We want multiple perspectives on this because we go through it quick. Okay, the next. What is the next request we should probably go over? Oh, I'm saving that for last. I think that's extra. puts the hard one. Yeah, let's do post. Get one, get all, and post. How many items do we post at a single time? One, unless we do a post many, which Mongoose supports, but we're gonna focus on post. Just one, how we typically do it. And we would like to add a movie object to this database. So let's set up the endpoint, app.post. What would the endpoint be to post a new movie if we're following REST? Yeah, we're gonna share the same endpoint. Movies, modes. Okay, we still get the rec and res objects. Are you starting to see this pattern?
Yeah.
How a route's set up? It's almost the exact same. You just change the endpoint. So post to movies. Well, what is when we're doing a post request in Postman, what am I going to have to do? Where do I go in Postman to actually make a post request successful?
Scroll down. Gotta give it some data.
Okay, I have to give some data. Where do I give it data?
Body.
Body. And what kind of data do I give it? Raw, text, JSON. Okay, so I'm going to be sending raw JSON. I'm going to say, here is your new object. It has a title, and it's Jaws 9. Here's our new movie. Do I need to add an ID here?
No.
Why?
The
The server should do that for us, or the database will eventually. But yeah, our server needs to add the data. So we need to be able to send this And then in our response console, we should get back title, JAWS 9, ID, and have its own ID. How do we receive this? Where is this object going to be inside of this route? Yes, it's going to be in here, but unfortunately not by default. We have to teach our server that sometimes the user may be sending a body with their request as JSON and you need to parse it. So there is our first instance of middleware. Hey! Who's heard of the word middleware? Alan's heard of it. Do we know what middleware is, Alan? You had to define it. It's very ambiguous at first.
I've used it, I don't know.
So actually, we have quite a bit of middleware here. Express servers, servers in essence is just a collection of middlewares. What that means is when the server processes run, only the functions that need to fire are firing. So if I send a request to movies, this is the only thing that's hitting, not this. So this is considered, these are all considered middlewares. They're things that fire on the in-between when necessary. Now, we're saying only fire, kind of like a click event, only fire if the request is the /movies. We can also set up middlewares that fire on every request if it's something necessary. And that's what this is. We need a middleware for every request. And what this middleware is going to do is check for a body that the user sent a object body. And if it did, it's going to parse that into JavaScript and give us access to it in the request object. So we have to tell our server to use some middleware. If you were writing server software and you needed a method to tell a server to use something, what would you call that method? Use, okay. Server, use the following. I could say only on request to movies, use the following middleware and put something in here. But we want this to fire on every request. So we're going to leave the endpoint off of it and just say use something called express.json. And what that does, express.json is a function in Express that checks for a JSON body in a client's request. If it finds it, it parses it into JavaScript and puts it in the request object. So we have access to it.
Can we sit down one more time?
Yes, I'm going to write it out too. Express.json checks for a body, JSON body in every request from a client if it finds that JSON. It converts it to JS and puts it in the rec object. So it'll check for a body that we're sending. If it sees it, it will parse it into JavaScript and put it in this object. So we'll find it in here. If you had to name the property of the rec object that's going to hold the body, what would you call it?
Body.
Yes. So let's console log rec.body.
Doesn't matter what order we put these functions.
It does, and we'll talk about that. Right now it doesn't. I mean, we want this to be before this because this is going to run before this. Still JavaScript, still reads top to bottom when a server request comes in. So we want this to parse the body and then give us access to it here so we can see it. So we should see this console logged in the console. Let's try it. We'll send the post. Come down here. There we go. Rec.body. And now notice if I uncomment or if I comment out this middleware, I'm gonna console log rec.body. We send this undefined. So the server can be taught how to do it, but it does need to be taught how to do it. It needs to be told to check for JSON bodies.
Does Express report or support any other data types?
Yeah, XML, HTML, text. You can
So it has a function that will do the same thing.
yeah, and you can, instead of saying res.send, you can say res.json to send pure JSON, do all sorts of stuff. Express can be used to feed up JSON, but you can also use Express as a server-side framework that sends entire HTML pages. Node has its own markup language for making templates, and you can just send those templates and make a server-side rendered site using this. but we're using it just for JSON purposes. We're making a web API. Okay, so we have the rec.body. So I'm gonna put it in its own variable in here. I'm gonna say const new movie is rec.body, just so this is easier to read. But what is this object missing? Before we send it back, a couple things need to happen. What needs to be added to this object?
ID.
An ID. How do we mutate an object to add a new key to it? New movie.
New, space new.
No.
Dot,
Dot.
UUID.
I'm naming the key here.
So it would just be ID?
ID equals UUID.
Oh.
We're just adding a property to an object. It's mutable, right? This is why we use arrays and objects. We can add and remove things from them without reassigning them. So we're saying you came in with the title, here's your ID. Before we send it back, to make sure it's really been added to the database, what do we need to do with it? We need to send it back here so the user can see the added item, but where does it need to be added?
It needs to be added to the data of the movie.
It needs to be added to our fake database. So how do we get it into this array? So we have movies. So say movies array, how do we add something to an array? Push the new movie. We're just simulating what Mongoose is going to be doing for us. Okay, and we are the makers of our server, so we get to choose what the response is. We could send back all the movies to show that here's all your movies plus the new one. Something more usual though is just to res.send the new item once it's been added to the database. So we send it with the title, we get it back with the title and an ID, and we should be able to then see it if we do a get all request to see all of our movies. Any question on this logic before we test it?
You said the database Mongo does something for us, or was it the push part?
It does this and this. We just say, we just have to say new movie.save. Mongoose will go and save it and bring back the saved version. It's not too bad.
So we don't even need to do res.send.
We will. We'll res.send what comes back from MongoDB, the saved item. But let's try it out. So we're now going to send JAWS 9 and hopefully get it back. So send, hey, JAWS 9 with an ID. Now let's really test this. Let's do a get request to our movies endpoint and make sure this has been added to our database. Joker, Godfather, Stitch, and JAWS 9.
That's so cool.
It's in our database. Now what happens when I do this? Stop the server, start the server.
Goes away.
Now when I do a get request, how many objects am I going to get back?
Stick it all. Oh, man.
We are working with a fake database. So every time, this is a program that's running right now. When this program restarts, it starts off as we see it here. If we just deal with that for like a day or two, and then we'll make it permanent. But
I was actually wondering about that, like how Facebook doesn't lose data, I guess.
it's all in the database. Yeah. Sweet. So get all, get one, and post. I might write notes on every line here just for good keeping. So users request body is found in rec.body. We are using express.json. We simulate the database by adding an ID to the object. We simulate DB by adding the object to the fake database. And then send back the new movie object with the ID. That has an ID. Cool. So we won't write it like this forever, but it's good enough to go over. What other requests do we have?
Destroy.
Destroy. Delete.
So violent. This says destroy.
So this will be fun. This will be something to write home about. We need to set this up, app.delete. Dan, what will my endpoint, man, you're getting popular on this thing. What will my endpoint be?
I had like a 3-week stretch of nothing. So.
It's like, I'm feeling appreciated again.
Movies / ID.
Yeah, /movies/ not just ID, colon ID. Right, we need to specify which one do we want to remove from the database.
So,
Oh, I'm ready.
Answer's 42.
It's always 42.
I actually approved it a couple months ago.
Really?
It was like for a month.
we need to find the one you want to delete. So, I would look at the delete movie.
Yeah, so we're going to be sending an ID, and using this ID, we need to update this array to not include the object of that ID anymore. We need to strip it out somehow.
I would, like, if we can look at the put one, or go up, scroll up, I think it's that, it'd be, cons. It would kind of look like that, wouldn't it?
So that will find the movie, but instead of just finding a reference to that object and sending it back, we literally need to, if they send Lilo and Stitch's use your ID back, we need to strip that out of the database.
Movies custom.
So split will, you're on the right track. Instead of split, there's another word that actually cuts something out. Yeah, splice. Split will turn a string into an array. Splice will strip an item out of an array. So we could use splice to remove the item.
You say like it's a new ID every time, so how can you-
Every time the server restarts, we'll get a new ID. So whenever we start over again, we'll just do a GET request. All right, so here's the ID until our server restarts. We can play in Postman. As long as we don't write anything in here or stop and restart the server, the IDs are the same. But as soon as I stop the server and restart it, everything is restarted fresh. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, in an actual database.
No, it won't be. And it won't bother us at all right now either, because for the session that's running, the IDs will be consistent. They only reset if we shut down our program and start it back up. And then everything's new and consistent anyways. So yeah, we'll be fine as long as you remember that, you know, writing something in here will cause the server to restart, or stopping the server will do that. All right, so we know we have the ID. Where am I finding the ID?
Is
Rec dot what? Where are we?
Body.
Body is if we're sending an object. We're sending a parameter. Rec dot what holds parameters? Params dot, and what will the name of this parameter be? Yep, whatever we called it here. Okay, so we have the movie ID, the one that we need to delete from the database. And if we're going to splice this movie out of the array, what does splice need as arguments? Does anyone recall? Yeah, splice needs the index number of what item in the array to remove. We need to find the index of the movie that has this ID in our database. What array method returns an index number? Index of. There's also, double check. So index of could work if we're looping over basic data types, or we're checking in just a singular array. But an array of objects, we may want to use find index. This is a higher order array method, just like find. As soon as it finds the thing you're looking for, instead of returning the whole object, it just returns the index number of that object. So we can use find index just like we used find to find the index of the one to remove. So const movie index to delete is movies.findIndex. For each movie, return the index if the movie ID is equal to what?
Movie ID.
Yeah, the one that matches the one they're requesting through the parameters. And since we put it in its own variable, we could just write this right here, but I'm separating everything for readability. And we're gonna make sure this works before we start mutating stuff. So movie index to delete. We're gonna console log movie index to delete. So if we do our get request to movies, what is the index of Joker? 0. So let's see if we send this in a delete request, if the console log shows 0. Great. Let's try The Godfather. All right, so we're finding the index of the movie with the ID in the database. So splice, we can now splice out of our movies array by saying movies.splice. And does anyone recall the arguments? What order they go in?
First is where and then how many. Right.
We're gonna look at it. I'm pretty sure you're right, but
I think so. So it's not bad.
oh no. As long as you know splice exists and what it does, look, even in interviews, be like, I know I need to use splice here. I just forget the arguments, what order they're in. Interviewers like, great, you know the tool. Go, remind yourself how the syntax works, but at least you know what your resources are. Yeah, so splice takes the index of what to delete, from that index, how many items to delete, and then if we want, we could say in its place, put any amount of items. So index and then how many. So movies.splice at what index? Movie index to delete. How many do we want to delete? 1. Okay. Now, again, you're creating the server, so you get to choose what does the delete request send back. Do we send back a message saying successfully deleted item, or do we send, what do we want to do?
What's left?
What's that?
You look for what's still there, right?
Yeah, so you could send back the entire array, but we'll quickly get into hooking this into React apps, and that's extremely expensive. If every delete request, every post request, every put request does their item and then sends back the entire collection, you probably already have that collection in your React state. So we don't need to send that all back to the user. We can either send back just the item or a message, and then have the front end figure out how to update state. Like, oh, that item was removed. Let's update React state, strip it out and make it work. So we can just res.send a message in this case, deleted movie. And we can make this more specific if we want, but let's test it. So I'm going to do a get request because all the IDs have updated. And I'm going to delete the Joker. Okay, got the message. How do I prove that it was deleted? Yeah, I could try doing a get one because this ID doesn't exist anymore, so it should just send back nothing. Didn't find any movie by that ID. If I get all my movies, it's gone. But it would be nice if this message says successfully deleted and then the specific movie. So a little user touch we could do on here, we could say const movie title is movies bracket movie index to delete dot title. Save a reference of the title before we splice it out. So we can say here, successfully deleted movie title. And it's a little bit better for the user. They can see that the movie they plan on deleting was deleted. So one more time, let's delete The Godfather. Cool. Successfully deleted The Godfather. Is it kind of fun seeing the call and response being on both sides of it?
Pretty cool.
I found it pretty exciting. Yeah, it's all logic, right? There's no CSS in this. It's just, this is where Edit pays off, right? We're going to be working through complex problems on both sides of our application, but especially back here. And knowing our tools, knowing how to index items and delete and find and all those methods, this is where it comes really helpful. All right, there's our delete. Any questions?
I do have one. Oh, never mind. I just figured out what time next is.
Receive. parameters. Find the index of that item in the database. Save a reference to the movie. Not necessary. Yeah, there we go. Update database. Send a response. Okay, we got one more request to go. Put. And what is put used for? Updates. Okay. App dot put. What would the endpoint be?
URL or slash movies.
I'm just saying what you're saying. Sorry. URL or slash movies.
Movies slash colon underscore ID.
Yes. Why do we need this again?
Because you can only update one at a time.
We want to specify what to update. Yes. Cool. Res. But the rest of it's the same, right? Just get the callback function, and here's where we're working out the logic. So hopefully through a few of these routes now, we're starting to see a separation. Route handler, express, logic that handles what happened through that request, API, right? This is the application programming interface. This is figuring out what's happening. And really, we'll interchange these words all the time. Server, API, they're very interchangeable because they're side by side. They're working together. Sometimes API is on a separate server than the server, and the server has to request and all that when apps get bigger, but very much the same thing for our intents purposes. Okay, this one is a little interesting. So we need to update the movie in this array that has the ID set through parameters. So what we're gonna have to do is just change the title, maybe. Or we can update the object to have a genre. Tell it to, you know, add a genre to this, this object. So we need to first find the object to update, create the updated version, update the database with the updated object, send back the updated object. So how do we find the object to update? So delete just found the index. We need the whole object.
Well, you get the movie ID still, wouldn't you? You could still copy paste the constant.
Okay, yeah, so we still get the movie ID. So I'll take this. As part one, here's the ID. We're looking for the movie with this. So using this and our array of objects, what higher order array method have we already used to grab that one object? Bind. So I'm just gonna go up to the get one, because it's the same thing. Except rec.params ID, we have saved it in a new variable, movie ID. Okay, so we found the movie. And instead of found movie, I'm gonna say movie to update. Updated. All right. Now we need to create an updated version. Well, the user with a put request, they're gonna send me the ID, but what else are they gonna send me? A body, and how do I find that body? Rec.body. That is where the object will be. But that object won't include everything my existing object was. They'll just send me something like this that has a title and saying update whatever's there that has this ID, give it this new title, but don't change anything else about it. Maintain the same ID. So we could do a really complicated for loop through an object and try to swap out keys, but there is a method in JavaScript that actually does that for us. So we're going to take a quick aside and look at that method. Again, Mongoose will do this for us, but it's good to know the underlying logic. Okay. Replit? It's just an online coding platform. You write your code, run it, see your code. It's nice. Okay, so let's say we have this right now. Movie is title Jaws 9. And it has an ID of something. We have this updates object that has a title of Jaws 10. We need a final object, a fully updated object that has this title and this ID. How do I merge these two objects together and have that happen? Well, there is a method in JavaScript called object.assign. We haven't looked at object methods very much, but this is what they look like. You typically call them on the object word, and then you give it objects as arguments. What object.assign needs is an object like movie and an update object like updates. It will compare these two objects, and any key it finds in updates, it will replace in the movie object and output an updated object.
You notice to look for keys?
Yep. It says, oh, we found a title key in updates and a title key in movie. Replace the title in movie with the one from updates, but leave ID alone. So this object should have a title of JAWS 10 and an ID of this. So let's prove it. Console.log updated object, run. And there we go. Title, JAWS 10, ID, the same one as before. So we can use this before we're using Mongoose to do this ourselves. Create an updated object. Create the updated version. Okay, so updated object, updated movie is, and who's gonna help me write this syntax? What arguments go where? What are we calling? Jeff.
Would be object.assign. First argument would be the movies. No?
Singular object we're wanting to update.
Oh, then it'd just be the movie.
That's the ID. Give you to update. I'm trying to use good naming conventions.
Yeah, I was taking notes while you were doing all that.
You're good. All right, so that's saying I want to update this movie. This is the one that's currently in the database, but it doesn't have the right title, comma, what object am I updating it with? The user is sending me this update. How am I receiving it? Rec.body. That is the updates object. It has the new title. Movie to update is the old movie that has the original title and the original ID. So we're saying mesh whatever the user sent you into this object and give us an updated version. We're having an earthquake. A screen is shaking. What's
He
that?
wasn't here for that.
Oh, you were here.
What?
The construction behind the place was shaking the whole building yesterday. So, like,
It was like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, so
yeah, it's like lift steps. And,
the water's like ripple effect.
They should do that for all.
Okay, the last step of this, let's keep this going. Update the database with the updated object. Arguably the hardest part. Object.assign does a lot of work for us, that's great. But now we have an interesting issue. If we're updating the Godfather, we need to strip this out and replace it with the other object. We don't want to upset the order that this array is in. So how do I say replace this with the updated version? Splice, sure. What does splice need to work? Yep, so we gotta grab the index. We'll grab the index as well. Find the outdated movie objects index number. And this is the movie index to update. So we have our updated movie. We have the index of where the outdated movie is. I now just need to replace it in my database. So again, what method can I use to do that? Strip something out, put something in. Splice. I can say splice out of my database at the index of the movie to update. Splice out one item and replace it with the updated movie. Then we can res.send the updated movie.
So the one is the, how many?
How many to remove at this index? Well, I just want to remove the one they've updated. And then this argument and any argument afterwards is what do you want to put in its place? So this is allowing us, if we sent this ID, stripping out this object and putting a new one exactly where it was without upsetting the array indexing.
I'm setting it in my putting it at the bottom or on the top, it's just putting it right in the middle where it's.
Yeah, or if it was the first item, it's making sure it's still the first item. It's still the object, it's just updated. So now we can test it. Let's see if we can do it. So we are gonna first get all of our movies. We're gonna change The Godfather to The Godfather 2. So we're gonna grab the ID of it and do a put request to that ID, but we need to give it the body of what object to update it with. The Godfather 2. Yeah, I can see it really well right here. Just okay, so we should get back this object, but new title, same ID. We'll send. There we go. If we do a get request to all of our movies, it's now The Godfather 2, but it's still in the middle. So we're gonna make you do all this logic today through an assignment, not make you get to. This is a learning experience, is what you're here for. But just know that we'll never have to do this again after the 2 assignments today, because Mongoose again does it all for us. So we'll go back over CRUD again once we introduce databases and show you the Mongoose syntax. But this is the syntax we want you to use. Or if there's other ways to do this put request. This splice I think is the most straightforward, but there's other ways. So if you want to do it another way, just to challenge or practice, feel free, as long as the end result is the same.
So how would you update the movies with Godfather 2?
This right here.
Yeah.
So this is our initial state, but as the server process is running, we are changing. It's just like playing the RPG. Your health starts off as 100, but as you're playing through the RPG, those numbers change, even though our code still shows 100. So the instance has changed, but if we restart a server, it goes back to that initial state. Yeah. And that's what a server is. It's a program instance, because everyone that's hitting up a server is hitting up an instance of that program to serve up the data. Not everyone's hitting, the same instance. That would be impossible. So this file runs, creates a server instance, and lets us interact with whatever's there. Okay.